Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, AlbyMTG. For today's video, we're going to be taking a look at my picks for the top 5 decks at the first ever Mythic Championship. The Mythic Championship is just what they're calling the Pro Tours now, and it's basically just the same thing, just with a different name change. They're called Magic Fest now, for those of you that aren't familiar with them. And at the Magic Fest, you're going to have a GP. You're going to have all of the regular side events that you would normally have at a GP. Basically, you're just having a GP, except there's also going to be a Pro Tour and a GP happening at the same time. I believe this one is in Cleveland to start things off. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it's Cleveland. So yeah, these are going to be my 5 picks for essentially the Pro Tour, but again, we're going to call it the Mythic Championship during this video because that's what WotC wants it to be called. So, my first pick here is Rakdos Midrange. Rakdos Midrange just coming off of a Grand Prix win here on February 17th, so nice and recent. Normally, the deck that ends up winning the GP right before the Pro Tour, right before the Mythic Championship, ends up doing pretty reasonably at the Mythic Championship as well, because people want to test it and see if it's any good. And then the people who don't really have a ton of time to test but want to play a good deck see, hey, this deck won a GP. It's probably good enough already, probably tested. We can just play this. It's very reminiscent of the mono red mid-range decks that we've seen before during last standard season. It's basically just trying to go pretty big. You're playing some cards like Chain Whirler, Rekindling Phoenix, and Siege Gang Commander, so kind of these, I guess not necessarily for Goblin Chain Whirler, but these bigger mid-rangey threats for a mono red deck. You're playing a Planeswalker like Karn to generate a little bit of card advantage. Normally in lists like these, you'll see some number of either Fight with Fire or Bane Fire to kind of take advantage of the fact that you're going to have a bunch of mana, with things like the treasure maps flipping and again 25 lands. Doesn't look like there's any in this list though, but again, you're playing some other bigger mana cards. So you have Carnival Carnage, which again, I'm sorry I can't flip this, but Carnival says to deal 1 damage to a creature and then 1 damage to that creature's controller, and then Carnage is a Mind Rot plus deals 3 damage to them as well. So pretty nice little card here. A lot of the time you're going to want to cast the Carnage side of this. Carnival again is mainly just going to be in case you're up against one of the aggro decks, which we'll talk about a little bit later. There's a pretty reasonable aggro deck choices for this specific event. And then the Eldest Reborn, again another kind of bigger mana card. So between 4 Phoenix, 3 Siege Gang, 1 Karn, 3 Carnival Carnage, and 2 Eldest Reborn, you're casting a lot of 4 and 5 drops, which are hopefully going to end up winning you the game. And then I really like the sideboard as well for, this is Jody Keith's list, the winner of the most recent GP. He has a little bit of everything in his sideboard to help him out with some matchups. So you can see 4 copies of Duress here, which are really good against control. If he's up against the smaller decks, the more aggressive decks, he's got access to Fiery Cannonade as well. And because he's not really playing too many, 2-drops, he can really set up a good Fiery Cannonade where he wipes out 2 or 3 of his opponent's board and then slams like a Siege Gang Commander, for example, or slams a Rekindling Phoenix, something like that. So I do really like this list here from Jody Keith, and I think people for the Pro Tour or Mythic Championship are going to be testing with this one, seeing if it's any good. So I like this here. Next deck that I have chosen is Esper Control. I think Esper Control is going to be your control deck for the event. I think most people who play Control are looking more at the Esper list instead of the Jeskai list. You do have access a little bit to some decent cards in Jeskai that you wouldn't have access to in the Jeskai list, because you don't get things like Deafening Clarion, or yeah, you get cards on the Jeskai list that you don't get in the Esper list. You get cards like Deafening Clarion, Lava Coil, those sort of things, but those can all sort of just be replaced by some of these cards here in the Esper list. So, for instance, to replace the Deafening Clarions, you're getting Cry of the Carnarium and Kaya's Wrath as well. And then to replace something like Lava Coil, you're getting things like Cast Down, Moment of Craving. Also, Thought Erasure, some hand attack could be really good too, which is great in the Control Mirror as well. So very nice there. And you'll see, again, 3 copies of Duress in the sideboard. People are really ready for these control matchups. I also like this one too, because this one has a transformative sideboard plan where if you are in game one, you can be the control deck, you can, kill all of your opponent's creatures, but in game two, you can side into a pretty sweet little Esper mid-range list, which has Thief of Sanity, Basilica Bellhaunt, Hostage Taker, and, the Eldest Reborn. You can side those in and play more of a mid-range game instead of a control game, which I think is pretty neat. And then an additional copy of Kaya's Wrath here in the sideboard as well. So yeah, I think this is going to be your basic control deck of choice. I think more people are going to play Esper over Jeskai, and wouldn't surprise me to see this list do some pretty good things here at the Mythic Championship. The next list we're going to go ahead and take a look at here is Mono Blue Tempo. Mono Blue Tempo was a deck that I wasn't a big fan of last Standard season. Last Standard season it did fine, but it wasn't great. But now that you have the addition of much better creatures, mainly Terramander, the addition of Terramander has made this deck so good now. And last week, you can see it came in first place at the SCG Open in Dallas. There was a bunch of Pro Tour players there who I saw their choice of deck was the Mono Blue Tempo list. They chose that one over any other deck they could be playing, so it wouldn't surprise me if they were using that event as sort of a practice to play Mono Blue Tempo, kind of, get used to it as they're going to play it in the Pro Tour. So I think this deck is going to be pretty sweet, and it wouldn't surprise me to see a bunch of good Pro Tour players or Mythic Championship players deciding to sleeve up Mono Blue Tempo, which I think is also pretty sweet. You're looking at a 12-ticket deck as well as $84 in paper, significantly cheaper than, for example, Esper Control was $500 for your standard deck. So having a budget deck being able to do so well on a competitive level is very nice with this Mono Blue Tempo list. Again, aside from Terramander, you really didn't get too much from Ravnica Allegiance. Everything else, I guess the Essence Capture you get as well too, but I've seen a couple lists not even run the Essence Capture, and you can see it's only a 1-of here in this list. Fairy Duelist out of the sideboard, again, is another cool little inclusion that they have for these lists. And then Entrancing Melody for 4 mana is where you're going to see the most common Entrancing Melodies cast. Entrancing Melody on 2 mana, or for X equals 2, and then 2 blue, total of 4 mana, gain control of target creature with converted mana cost X. That can take a Hydroid Krasis. After they put 1,000,000 mana into their Hydroid Krasis, you can go ahead and just take it for 4 mana with this Entrancing Melody. It can be used to take other creatures too, but a very common play pattern that you're going to see during the Mythic Championship is going to be Entrancing Melody for 4 mana to take a Hydroid Krasis. That's going to be something you're going to see a lot. And again, I think that this deck is positioned really nicely. You've got some good sideboard cards, and it's a very nice deck. So Mono Blue Tempo here. I think this is actually going to be my choice to win the event. I think Mono Blue Tempo is going to be the kind of list that people are really looking to play. And I think my prediction for the first ever Mythic Championship is going to be a victory from Mono Blue Tempo. Again, we're going to continue to look at some more lists, though. We have Soultime Midrange here, which again is a Hydroid Krasis deck. Hydroid Krasis being the big boogeyman of the format, one of the best creatures right now that you could possibly be playing. And then aside from that, just has a bunch of other, fantastic creatures to go along with it. We're talking about Carnage Tyrant against the control decks, Ravenous Chupacabra to 2-for-1 your opponent, Hostage Taker to do something quite similar. You have the little Explore package with Branch Walker, Wild Growth Walker, and Jade Light Ranger. And then you just have access to some really good spells too. Vivian Reed here, 3 copies, 1 Assassin's Trophy, 2 Cast Down, 2 Vraska's Contempt, and then 3 Find Finality. So again, you have a little something for all the matchups. Vivian Reed's great against control. Find Finality is great against the aggro decks if you can manage to stabilize here. The ability to gain some life off of Vraska's Contempt can be pretty relevant too. And also against the aggro decks, gaining the life off of the Wild Growth Walkers is also a really important thing. Notably, this list specifically is not running any copies of Hadana's Climb, which is another card that some people were potentially going to be running in their Soultime Midrange list. This person opted not to. I think this is Corey Burkhart's list. I'm not 100% sure. I think it is. And this was the list that came in second place at the Grand Prix this weekend, the list that lost to Rakdos Midrange in the finals. So again, just a very solid list here, very well put together. Again, we're seeing 4 more copies of Duress in the sideboard, so you're going to see a lot of Duress cast this weekend at the Mythic Championship, and overall looks like a pretty sweet list here for Soultime Midrange. And the final deck that we're going to go ahead and talk about today is, of course, Bant Nexus. We need to go ahead and just talk about it for a bit. Bant Nexus is going to be legal for the Mythic Championship, despite it being banned in the best for one rooms on Magic Arena now. You're still going to see players sleeving up Nexus of Fates or sleeving up Nexus of Fate proxies for the Mythic Championship. And I think it's going to be a solid deck, but I think, again, a lot of people are going to be ready for it. The decks that we talked about, the majority of them have had 3 to 4 duress in their sideboard, which again is fantastic against these decks. Sure, they can sideboard into a little bit of a creature plan, Deputy of Detention, Knight of Autumn, Lyra Dawnbringer, and Nezahal Primal Tide, but the majority of these decks are going to be decks that are running, spells that can be hit by duress. I also chose the Bant Nexus lists over the 2 other Nexus versions. The other 2 Nexus versions being not Wilderness Reclamation, being Temur Nexus and Simic Nexus. Simic Nexus, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not really a big fan of. I don't know why people play it. I think it's worse than the Bant Nexus and the Temur Nexus decks, but people like playing the Simic one for some reason. I guess the mana's better, but right now, again, we're living in a Checkland, Shockland standard, so I don't think you need to worry too much about your mana. And then in the Temur version gets to run Expansion Explosion in it, but it doesn't get to run Teferi. And so I think in the mirror match, both in the mirror matches and in the control matchups, I think landing it Teferi is basically the only way you're going to be able to steal a game against your control opponents. So I do like that you have the Teferi in here against the other control decks, that you can maybe set up a turn where you you have like so much mana, you cast a Nexus in your main phase, they counter the Nexus, you slam Teferi and hope that Teferi can get there, and then you can just use that as a way to draw some cards. And then, of course, in the sideboarded games against control, you'll get to bring in the Nezahals and the Lyra Dawnbringers probably as well. So again, I think this deck is pretty sweet. I also like that this standard format right now has such a wide variety of decks. Again, for this video, I chose the Rakdos Midrange list, the Esper Control list, the Mono Blue Tempo list, the Soultime Midrange list, and the Bant Nexus list. But there were some other decks that we really could have talked about here. We could have talked about the Azorius aggro list, which I think is going to be the aggro deck of choice aside from the Mono Blue Tempo list. Which one did I have Mono Blue Tempo? I think it was this one. I think this is the deck that most people are going to go to if they're feeling more aggressive for the tournament. I think the Mono Blue Tempo list will be what they'll choose, but again, the Azorius aggro lists are a fantastic choice for this tournament as well. You have the white cards that put together a great showing in the last standard format, and then you get access to things like Negate and Dovin out of the sideboard. Another great choice for this event would be something like Is It Drake's. Again, didn't really get anything new from Guilds of Ravnica, or from Ravnica Allegiance outside of Terramander, but again, could be another great choice for this event. You have the 4-color Gates deck as well, the Nexus of Gates deck as well, where people are playing Gates plus Nexus of Fate. So really, there are a ton of decks that could have done quite well here at this tournament. Again, I just chose the 5 that I think are going to be the best choices. Again, we could end up seeing something like last standard season, where I choose to leave out a white-based aggressive strategy on the list, and then a white-based aggressive strategy just ends up taking the whole thing, like the Azorius aggro list would do here, and like Boros aggro did last time. But again, I think it could be pretty good. Mono Blue Tempo is going to be my choice for the event. Let me know down below in the comment section what your choice for the event is. And if you guys have any questions or opinions on these decks, be sure to let me know down below in the comment section. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video, and I'll see you guys here next time. Thank you all so much for watching today's video, where we covered the 5 decks that I think are going to do the best at the Mythic Championship. Again, there were some other decks that I think can do pretty well at the Mythic Championship as well, so I think this is going to be a fantastic event to maybe get a chance to watch some solid Standard, especially since they're doing coverage this time and they haven't been doing coverage all season. So with that being said, at the end of all of my videos, I love to give a huge shout out and thank you to my patrons at the end of each of my videos. So huge shout out and thank you to Jeremy, Jason, Rodrigo, Down Under MTG, and Battle of MTG for supporting me over on the Patreon page. Greatly, greatly appreciated, everyone, and I'll see you guys here next time.